Good day. This is Len Lazarick at MarylandReporter.com. Believe it or not, we're just 4 weeks away from a primary election in Maryland. And with us today, we're going to be talking about election laws with Delegate Jon Cardin, who heads the Election Law Subcommittee in the House Ways and Means Committee, and Delegate Kathryn Afzali, who has some legislation in about election laws. And also, by the way, she really wanted me to mention this, is a candidate for Congress in the 6th Congressional District.
Yes.
But your the bill that you have in doesn't relate to that. It's kind of been a perennial bill. This is a bill that requires voters to show identification.
Well, my bill is a little bit different than the usual perennial voter ID bill, which has not met with good support in the House of Delegates in recent years. So,
or in the Senate.
Or anywhere in the capital of Maryland. But it's very important to my constituents. It's very important to my voters. And so this year I actually came up with a bill that was hopefully a compromise, because I know Delegate Cardin and some of the members of my committee didn't like a voter ID bill. So what I decided was to listen to them. And they believed that voters would be disenfranchised, especially minority voters, if they had to show ID at the polls. So I came up with the idea that no one would ever have to show ID at the polls, that actually the information from their driver's license could be downloaded to the polling booths. This would be a very inexpensive way to avoid the issue of people having to buy IDs.
So the election judges would actually have all the MBA.
They would have whatever would be on your driver's license, your age, your height, a picture of you. And I thought this was a great compromise, but apparently some of my Democrat colleagues don't think so.
So, Delegate Cardin, this bill is different than someone coming in and showing a voter ID. Is it any more acceptable than the previous?
There are different issues, not the same issues, but there are some issues that I personally have with the bill. Although I haven't polled my subcommittee yet, we haven't voted on the bill. I will talk about what I think are some of the issues that we have to deal with. First of all, it's a very innovative, creative way to talk about it, because just in terms of some background, last year or 2 years ago, we passed a bill that required the MVA to start electronically talking to the State Board of Elections. We did this to make sure that people who did want to register to vote could register as easily and transparently as possible without being disenfranchised. We modeled it on legislation that is happening in Delaware. The State Board is in fact doing it with the MVA, and it's working pretty well. So I think that what Delegate Afzali took from that was, well, if they're talking together already, why not have our poll books reflect that on the election day? That's what I'm presuming.
Yes.
There's two issues that I have. The first is that the cost is not negligible. To do this, to have both the hardware and the software to be able to do this, is a huge venture that will cost millions and millions of dollars. I'm not suggesting that it's insurmountable. I'm just saying that in this state, we don't have those kinds of budgets. Knowing what we're dealing with the budget right now, I don't think that it's a reasonable way to go, at least for this coming election. And number two is that only solves part of the problem. Many of the advocates for voter ID want to have every single person show an ID to prove that they are who they say they are at the polling place.
And a lot of people don't have driver's licenses.
You hit the nail on the head. A lot of people don't have driver's licenses, and
But don't you have a fundamental problem with the notion of voter ID? You really don't think there's any significant problem with voter fraud?
I do not believe that there is a significant problem with voter fraud. And it's not just me. The Bush administration, back about 7 years ago, did a 5-year-long investigation. And they came up with nationwide 86 convictions on voter fraud, of which 0 pertained to issues of in-person impersonation at the polling place, which is the only thing that voter ID solves.
But you you feel otherwise about?
Well, I do feel otherwise because, first of all, in many states there's been no way to check if there's been fraud at the polls, and that's been part of the problem. Is that also during the Bush administration, the Help America Vote Act was passed after the fiasco of the 2000 election, and that was a very bipartisan. Jim Baker, Jimmy Carter was on that committee, and they all agreed that in order for elections to be fraud-free, or at least to give the integrity of the vote and to help every vote count, that showing an ID at the polls was part and parcel to a fraud-free election. And this is part of the problem, is the mentality is, well, we don't have any evidence that there's fraud at the polls, but in fact, we don't know if there's fraud at the polls because it can't be detected in the state of Maryland. And I would like to say another point, and that is that in the recent petition drive, as you know, there was a huge petition drive to overturn in-state tuition for illegal immigrants. What we found during that petition drive is the very same people who are saying that we should not have to show photo ID at the polls are the same people that said, well, we don't want to use those signatures on those petitions because we don't know if they were fraudulently gathered. So you can't have it both ways. Either you say a signature, which is all you need to vote in the state of Maryland, either a signature is valid in the state of Maryland or a signature is not enough to be valid.
And in case it's not obvious to viewers, because Delegate Cardin brought up the Bush administration, Delegate Cardin is a Democrat and Delegate Afzali is a Republican.
It's probably a little obvious.
Republican, but there is a significant difference in the petitions, and Delegate Cardin is a co-sponsor of a bill that at the moment says that petitions would have to be notarized, which would be a significant additional step. But one of the differences we're talking about, when voters come to the polls, they're actually physically there, and with the petition, all you have is a piece of paper with somebody's name on it.
I'm not used to you making my case for me.
But, well, I mean, it's just apparent as I thought about it.
Right.
But I think the idea of notarization
Okay.
is a significant hurdle that would tend to deter people from filling out the petition.
Not only is there physically a difference between petitions and voting at the polling places, but there is very significant differences in the law. There is, it's clearly stated that petitions there's just a different standard in there. That being said, we do have a bill out, I am a co-sponsor on it, that would impact how petitions are accepted. I made it clear when I was going to co-sponsor this that the notarization issue was going to be one that we were going to have to take up and look at and decide how we were going to handle that. I said I want there to be it to be very clear that this should not make it onerous or tremendously onerous. Maybe people might already consider it onerous as it is presently. To be able to get valid petition signatures.
Because anybody's had to fill out a financial form, and you got to get it notarized, and you got to hunt around.
Well,
where's
it's
the
not. It's not just the difficulty of getting it notarized, but there could be an argument of it being "quote unquote" a poll tax type issue because many notaries actually charge for their services.
Right.
Not all, but many do. And I made it clear that that was an issue of contention. And the
I
lead
think there's
sponsor,
a state maximum charge of like $2.
$2,
but
still,
most people do charge.
Listen, if we certainly don't want it to be unconstitutional. So
Well, that's good.
so the answer is that is going to be amended out. But the issue that needs to be discussed is the fact that the spirit of the law makes it clear that a circulator and a signer are two different people, period. And so we need to figure out a way to ensure that, in fact, somebody is validating that signature is of a person who says that they are who they are, and somebody is willing to attest to that. That's all. I think it's a pretty fair, and I am certainly willing to work with my Republican colleagues to make sure that this is not onerous.
Do I get to respond?
You do get to respond. We have less than a minute left.
Well, it is terribly onerous, and it is an attempt by the leadership in Annapolis to squelch the petition process, which is in our Constitution that the voters have a right, after a law is passed by the General Assembly, the voters have a right to have the final word. And what this is an attempt to do with the referendum coming up for the gay marriage bill, this is an attempt to, and this and other bills in our General Assembly right now, in my committee, this is an attempt to squelch the referendum process and to make it so onerous that, and it already is onerous. I mean, we barely, we had so many of our signatures ripped out, and I signed a petition before we ever had the in-state tuition drive. I signed a petition for someone else, and my signature was thrown out because I didn't write my name properly. So it's very hard to get something on the ballot, and this is an unfair.
All right, 10 seconds to respond, and then we're going to wrap it up, the onerous aspect of this.
We just want to make sure that whoever is attesting to the person signing it is attesting that that person is doing it legitimately. Certainly, we don't want to make it difficult so that people are throwing out names that are legitimate names.
Yes.
And what we're talking about today are important issues that relate to the validity of elections and the validity of petitions. And we're probably going to have two big issues on the ballot in November with petitions. Thanks for watching us today. Thanks for Delegate Jon Cardin and Delegate Kathryn Afzali for joining us.